and I just kind of went into my shell, didn't say anything, just used every ounce of energy I had to stop myself crying, because I thought it was wrong to cry in front of people and to admit that I was hurt and that I was upset. And no one ever told me differently. I mean, I know differently now, and I would hope that if I was in a situation trying to look after or support a young person in that position, I would try to encourage them to express their grief. But it just didn't really happen. And I really don't mean this criticism of anyone. I just don't think anyone really knew or understood
No.
what was happening. I was scared.
Welcome to The Narratives of Suicide, the podcast where we bring hope, community, and a voice to those who've lost to suicide. It's where we dispel the myths of suicide. We dispel historical discourses and constructs that have been steeped in history for a very long time, and we're here with hope, love, and support for everyone out there who needs to listen to this podcast. I'm so sorry you're here, but I do hope it can give you something to use in your healing process, to be able to pick up the pieces of suicide and put them back together again in the best possible way that you can. So welcome today, everyone, to the Healing Narratives of Suicide. Today we've got a guest from Cardiff in Wales in the UK, and Nick is here to share his experience of losing a friend back in secondary school, in sixth form here, which is kind of high school, 17 years old. So I'm thinking that was probably over 20 years ago. Nick, I don't know your age, but I'm guessing it's about that long ago. So we're going back a little while, but it's really great to have you here, Nick. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Sue. And yes, it was just over 20 years ago now.
Yeah, so it's been a while. It's just great you can be here to share the experience of being a teenager and it happening to a friend, and how you've pieced things back together since, because I know you've been through a lot since, and there's been parts of you who you're trying to make a difference now because of what happened in your experiences. So it'd be great to just take us back and share with us what you can of that experience of the past 20 years, what it's been like.
Of course, I'd be happy to.
Where should we start? Should we start back in 19...
Yes.
What year would it have been?
It was 1999, so right at the end of the last century, before everybody had a mobile phone in their pocket, certainly one that was connected to the internet, which obviously means that it was more difficult for people to access sources of support, I think, in the context of losing someone in this way. And yeah, I was at the secondary school, so the kind of 16 to 18 stage of education that was attached, the sixth form that was attached to my secondary school, so ages 16 to 18. A large comprehensive school in the south of England. You might have picked up from my accent, I'm not from Wales originally. And it was, in 1999 when I lost my friend Zaf to suicide, took his own life when I was 17 and he was 18.
So young, such a young age to come to that for him and for you to experience it.
Yeah, I think that was relevant to my experience, my ability to express myself and to share with other people or otherwise. So yeah, I'm sure we'll touch on that in a minute.
Yeah.
Maybe I could just say a little about Zaf himself.
That'd be lovely. Yeah.
To kind of give a little bit of background.
Yeah.
Right, so he was described as being an intelligent young man, sort of 18 years of age, with a dry and perhaps slightly cynical sense of humour. He was kind of a good husband, if you like. Football primarily, which he didn't do, but we played rugby and hockey and athletics kind of for the school and things together. He was into music in a big way. He was a talented guitarist and loved his Jimi Hendrix, which I was always in awe of, being completely unmusical myself. He was into his literature. We were in the same A-level English literature class. He was slightly, I guess, kind of brooding, had that kind of maybe a little bit mysterious or kind of hard to access or to connect with for a lot of people. I think we had quite a good friendship, but he certainly wasn't part of the clique of, popular secondary school people. And to be honest, neither was I. I kind of had the sporting side of things going for me, but I was pretty studious and pretty kind of worked hard and didn't mess around too much, probably a bit too well behaved for my own good looking back. So we were probably sort of both outside the typical kind of bubbles, if you like, in secondary school. He also had quite a different cultural and ethnic background to most people in our school. At that time and in that place, it was not particularly diverse. When I think forward about it since then, I do wonder whether that had any impact on his experiences of school life. It's not something that we ever talked about. I was kind of aware enough of then to ever ask him about, but I think I'd be very surprised if there wasn't some relevance. And he was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder, or as we knew it back then as being kind of unaware, 17, 16, 18, 15-year-olds, whatever, as manic depression. So he would obviously suffer from depressive episodes, which I probably never really witnessed or saw, because he tended to be away from school, I think, when they happened. And then also from more intense periods of a slight high, which he sometimes, I think, tried to deliberately indulge. For example, I always remember, like, before we played rugby matches, he would have a reaction to kind of fizzy caffeinated drinks. So he would deliberately to try and get himself into some kind of state of excitement, because he thought it would make him kind of play better. So he was kind of quite unique and peculiar and unusual, as I know everyone is, but in a way that perhaps sort of stands out more than it would for most people.
Gosh, yeah. So did you know he had bipolar, manic depression back then? Was he open about that with you?
Yeah, he was open about it, and he would always reference it, kind of in passing. We didn't talk about it in any depth. And in all honesty, I think partially because of my age and inexperience, partially because I didn't witness the more difficult side of the condition, I kind of didn't believe it and just dismissed it as being maybe cry for attention or trying to kind of make a bigger deal of something than it really was. Obviously, in hindsight, I appreciate that was a big error and mistake and misguided on my part, but that's how I think I viewed it back then, and didn't know any better.
No, when you're that age as well, especially back then, the emotional intelligence of the world wasn't the same as it is now with mental health awareness, was it? With being 17 years old back then, it's not the same as we talk about it now, is it? So you wouldn't have an awareness of even what that means. If someone says that, you couldn't have Googled it the same way, could you, as you could now? What does manic depression mean? Could you back then? Yeah, because you could have Googled it. You wouldn't have had a phone to Google it.
No, if you went onto a PC with dial-up broadband and waited 5 minutes or so, you could probably have got an answer. And the answer you got wouldn't have been anywhere near as comprehensive as what you would get today. So it was a different world, and we weren't I really do believe we weren't as emotionally aware. And one thing I think I'll touch on in a while is the issue of support for young people in that situation. And I'm very aware and hope that things are better now. And I know that in the UK, the school leaving age has effectively been upped to 18. So I believe if you're not in employment or apprenticeship, you have to be in school for those years now. But there'll be a lot of people that slip through the system. There will be people in employment, in apprenticeships, who, even if that help is available in schools, won't be able to access it. So I think that if we reflect on my experiences and an answer is, oh, well, it would be better now because schools are more aware, I would definitely caveat that with saying, well, not everyone at that age is in school. And it's probably a bigger kind of cultural shift is what we need, in tandem with services and more support being offered to those that are affected by these kind of experiences.
Yeah, there is more support in school than there ever has been, but it's still not enough. There's charities now that do counselling within schools, and it's in the UK anyway, and there is so much more awareness of mental health, but it's still the pressure, isn't it? It's still so much pressure on students to achieve, and there's a lot going on there, isn't there? But you back then, at that age, were doing your best to... Well, you were just being you, weren't you? You were just being a friend, weren't you? And I guess we might touch on it later, but there's probably guilt there for not paying more attention back then, or maybe not taking it as seriously, I'm guessing. Well, maybe not guilt, but something probably there for that.
Yes.
From that.
Oh, no, I'd say, aside from the kind of obvious intense grief and sadness, guilt has been the kind of emotional response that I've carried with me for the most of the time in between, and carried it the heaviest, definitely. And there's a few sort of situation that I'll perhaps describe in a minute, which only added to that, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. So, what happened then in terms of that you can share around the event that made you feel more guilty?
Well, made the decision to take his own life when he was 18, and it was just a few weeks before my 18th birthday. And he'd had a couple of incidents that had contributed to him being in a kind of state of mind where that was the option he decided to take. He'd had his guitars smashed, which I think upset him a great deal. And then the final thing, he was working in a fast food outlet on a Friday night, I believe, and someone stole his bike while he was at work. And then he left work, realised his bike was missing, and that was the final straw that broke the camel's back, and he basically never went home. But the thing that I think really always kind of hits me and makes me really astounded with disbelief, as well as the kind of neglect to the bipolar in his mental health situation, is that he had a couple of bets with a mutual friend who we were in the same classes for A levels and kind of knew one another fairly well and had a reasonably long friendship of 7 years or so, and me and the other guy for years and years before that. And those bets were that Zaf wouldn't touch a drop of alcohol, and I forget the time frame that was placed on that, and to my knowledge he never did, and also that he would be dead by the 1st of March. And I refused to take that bet, seeing it as being ridiculous, and again probably kind of perceiving it as being a little bit attention seeking. My friend took it and bet him £10 that he would not be dead by the 1st of March. And that was something that I was aware of, and it was kind of a long running joke within a little friendship group of 4 or 5 of us.
Yeah, thinking no more of it probably at the time. You wouldn't think. I talk about this a lot with the reality of suicide. I don't think it's humanly possible to think that that's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? So there was no intent, was there? It was just a lad's joke, wasn't it, by the sounds of it?
Yeah, as far as we knew, and as far as my other friends knew, I'm sure he certainly wouldn't have entertained that if he thought there was any kind of seriousness behind it.
Yeah.
But then when we went into our sixth form on the 1st of March, which was Monday the 1st of March, I think the kind of dates of this particular week kind of imprinted in mind, and we went in to a lesson that 4 or 5 of us should have been in, and Zaf wasn't there, so we were joking about the bet and the date and the fact that my friend might have lost his bet and then thought nothing of it. And I think I was heading home. I got a bus between school and home a little later that day, just after lunch or something. I bumped into the friend who made that bet with him outside the local kind of corner shop. And he told me then that actually Zaf was in intensive care and things weren't looking fantastic. A small group of them were going to go and try and visit him in hospital, which I declined to do, which again is another thing that I do regret now. Instead, I opted to go to the local CD shop, as it was then, before Spotify and iTunes and iPods, and buy a CD of a pretty awful song and go home and just play it on repeat, I think, just to try and blank out this news I'd been given and to try and kind of numb.
Yeah.
Didn't tell anyone, didn't share with anyone, and then got up and went to school the next day. Zaf wasn't there, didn't talk to anyone, didn't have any offers of a conversation or any kind of support. Went to work at a supermarket after sixth form. Got home, I think it was probably about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, to be told by my parents that the head of our sixth form had tried to phone me. They didn't tell me why. I didn't ask. I didn't try and return the call. Again, I just think I tried to blank it out and numb myself to it. I think I knew why, but I didn't want to know why.
Yeah.
So I went to bed, got up the next day and went in, and we were going to a conference for our English literature course in London on a coach, and I was just stood around waiting beforehand. I remember seeing one of my other friends kind of catch my eye and sort of turn and say to someone else, I don't think Nick knows. So he had to come over and pull me outside and tell me. And that was when obviously I knew definitely then, and there was no escape for it, because someone had actually told me. Go into more detail about that day, but obviously it was a bit of an odd day, and I was sat on the bus back and forth between London, went to the conference, didn't really have any real memory of it, and then went home and again didn't speak to anyone, didn't tell anyone. One of my teachers that I got on with saw me waiting at the bus stop, and she was giving somebody else a lift home, another teacher, and they were essentially going past where I lived, and she stopped and she sort of said, get in, and I can't have you getting the bus on your own today. And that was it. There wasn't any discussion. Obviously she was referencing what had happened, and I knew that, but I don't think any of us were equipped to talk about it. She was in her 20s, I know in her late 20s, I was 17, she was trying to help, but just probably struggling hugely herself as well. And then in terms of kind of feelings of guilt or things that certainly didn't help, I found out a few days later that it was the funeral, and I understood that because of Zaf's and Zaf's family's religious beliefs that we wouldn't be able to attend the funeral, but we believed we'd be able to attend the burial. And I turned up again. We didn't have phones, we didn't have WhatsApp, we didn't have any easy way to contact one another. So I turned up one day and found out that that was the day that the funeral was happening. So I had to go to another friend's house, and the one which told me that the funeral, and borrow some of his dark clothes I was wearing wasn't suitable, and I didn't have time to get home and get back and get changed. And then a few of us went and stood in the cemetery. I'm not religious and I don't really know how it works, but I believe it was a kind of a non-Christian section of some kind of Christian domination church. So we were waiting there for the burial, but vicar had to come over and ask us to leave the grounds because we weren't permitted to be there. So we had to kind of watch it from afar. One of our teachers was okay to be there, because I think that according to their beliefs, the teachers are fairly honourable and prestigious position and dealt with the respect they deserve. But we had to kind of watch, and then when all the adults had gone, go and sort of say our goodbyes as a little group of, I don't know, 7 or 8 17, 18-year-olds who hadn't got a clue what they were doing or how to behave. And I think that kind of distance really from any adult contact, from any ability to really share with people, from any guidance. And obviously it was not the family's place to look after us. They just lost their son and their brother and their nephew and their cousin. We're not their responsibility. But nobody else did take any responsibility for us. We didn't have a school counsellor. We didn't have a teacher. There was really very, very little there for us. We did organise a memorial service for him that was kind of focused on his music, which was not necessarily the music that I would choose, which actually happened on my 18th birthday. So the first legal pint I ever bought was in the pub after that. But it was just some bands playing. There wasn't a lot of acknowledgement of what happened or of him. And I remember in the aftermath a suggestion that maybe we could try and raise money for some kind of memorial in the school. And there was this kind of glorify the name or because of suicide, and obviously the thought that there might be copycat that kind of instance. I'm sure what was on their mind. But I do think it did sort of deny us the opportunity to grieve properly and to say in the way that we kind of expect to be able to.
Yeah, such a big thing, I think, with suicide, or maybe more so in the past, maybe, but still happening now. Hear it of just this, we can't glorify it. I mean, if it was any other death, it wouldn't be glorifying, would it? Just to have a funeral and say goodbye and do memorial services, a completely natural, normal thing to do to celebrate the life. It's so sad that you at that age just couldn't express yourself in any way. And at that age, anyway, can you? You don't want to go to mum and dad and say, I'm feeling like this. Like you say, you just went into quietness, didn't you? And kind of just tried to get on and shove it down somewhere.
Yeah.
And then you all tried to do the memorial and then got it shut down by being glorified. Horrible.
But yeah, and then a responsibility for the people that had to actually tell me what had happened. And I know that I did miss that one phone call from the head of my sick form. So she did try to make some contact with me, but 3 different friends told me he was in hospital, he died, and that today was the funeral. And I just kind of feel that responsibility shouldn't fall to guys that were the same age as Zaf and I were. That it just doesn't seem fair. And I think it has and did perhaps lead me to question a little bit the legitimacy of my grief. I'm fully aware, as I said, he wasn't my brother, my husband, my son, my wife, my child. And it would be very, very different with that even closer relationship. It's still a quite traumatic event, I think, for people to go through. And grief in those circumstances is perfectly valid and legitimate. But I just don't really feel that there was the kind of opportunity to express that. There were a few kind of efforts. We had one teacher who sort of sat everyone down and tried to talk it through the best he could, but he meant well, but obviously had no training, had no preparation for that. And I remember just kind of, it was the day after I found out, and just sat there kind of rocked back on my chest, staring at my hands, not wanting to express grief, being scared to cry in front of people, being scared to look weak and acknowledge my emotions. I remember my grandparents, it was a Sunday, saying, we kind of sat down and they said, "Oh, sorry about your friend." And again, same reaction. I just kind of went into my shell, didn't say anything, just used every ounce of energy I had to stop myself crying, because I thought it was wrong to cry in front of people and to admit that I was hurt and that I was upset. And no one ever told me differently. I mean, I know differently now, and I would hope that if I was in the situation, trying to look after or support a young person in that position, I would try to encourage them to express their grief, but it just didn't really happen. And I really don't mean this criticism of anyone. I just don't think anyone really knew or understood what was happening. I was scared.
Still think that when it happens today, people just don't know what to do. People just don't know. It's not an experience you go through all the time, so you've got no guidebook as parents or as teachers or as young people or as anybody. But it's that ripple effect you're describing of the ripple it had effect on the community and other people. And of course, you can always say, well, have I got the authority almost to grieve because I'm just a friend? But friends are so important at that age as well. And at any age, your friends, you might see more than your parents. It's just a different relationship, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, I definitely do think that I was aware of that and unsure how upset I was allowed to be, if you like, and unsure and not able to express myself. And I think there's another kind of issue there as well, which is if you're like I was, a slightly shy, embarrassed, awkward 17-year-old who I think I always have had a fairly full and rich emotional life internally and private, but the ability to express it is not so strong and is probably subject to kind of social norms and conventions that we all pick up and learn. And, maybe they have shifted a bit in the last 20 years, and I really hope they have. But it's no good then, even if someone had offered the opportunity to talk, like a couple of people tried to, one teacher or even my grandparents in their clumsy way. I'm sure my parents tried to engage about me at some level, but we didn't have a pattern or an established relationship that committed us to speaking that way. We didn't talk about emotions and feelings. We didn't open up to one another. And I don't think you can just suddenly expect people to do that just because they've had a kind of an awful event happen and just because they're upset. You need to nourish those kind of healthy, open relationships from the start and from day one if you want people to be able to kind of react in a more healthful way to grief. So I think that's why when I mentioned before about just saying things are better in schools isn't an answer for everyone, but it's not just about the support being there, but it's about us having a kind of norms that allow us to talk openly, to express ourselves and to ask how we are and to answer honestly.
So you're saying what would have helped you is to foster those relationships before an event happens, so foster the relationships now every single day, so that if something does happen, anything happen, then you've got the base there to be able to feel that you've got someone there.
Yeah.
Is that what you're kind of saying? And that's a societal thing as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
That we're moving into now.
Yeah, I think so. I know there's been a lot of attention on kind of mental health, and it's kind of the idea it's good to be open about your own mental health and your own struggles, and that's a really positive step, and I think is kind of on the same trajectory as what I'm talking about. But I think it just doesn't have to be a mental health struggle. Just being more emotionally expressive, I think, could be a good thing for a lot of people. And I know there's some kind of versions of masculinity that would not permit that, and I'm sure as a kind of pretty sport obsessed 17-year-old, I was brought into some of those notions of what a man is, stoicism and the ability to just get on and to not admit kind of emotional pain. And I'm not an aggressive. I've never been an aggressive or kind of particularly alpha male style person, but these kind of norms I think still do have an impact, and I'm sure there's others that apply to other people and other people from other backgrounds that just don't permit us to be as open as we could be.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there was a study done once on who did boys speak most to, and boys in particular were spending more time with the people in the taxi that they were sitting next to, or the people on the bus, or the people at their local group where they go and play football. They do more talking around those kind of social events, or when the focus isn't on them, to sit opposite one person and talk like you might have had the opportunity to do, or in that small group, was too much. But put you in your natural environment where you're playing football or something, and then open up conversations. Get counsellors into the football areas, get counsellors into the pub or wherever it might be, where people generally feel safe and hang out. That's where the work can be done.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And chimes a little, I think, with my experience. The only time I ever really spoke to the friend who had made the bet with Zaf was 2 years later when we were out for a drink. We didn't see a great deal of each other after. after we kind of went our separate ways at the end of sixth form and things, but we spoke a little bit then and just sort of tried to reassure one another there was no way that we actually could have known that we didn't and shouldn't bear any responsibility. But that was out. Well, we didn't go out to talk about that. It's just we probably had having a couple of drinks probably kind of loosened our inhibitions a bit, and obviously both wanted and needed to make some kind of meaningful connection on the topic with one another.
You sound like you've done a lot of reflecting on it and a lot of thinking about it since for 20 years. You're still talking about it now, today. So it's obviously affected your life since in different ways. And I'm wondering how you've coped with it really, and how you've got through the 20 years to be as reflective as you are.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I can try and reflect on a few things. I've never sought any kind of professional help. Could have been beneficial, I'm sure. I've never contacted an organisation that deals with grief. In one way, the main tool, if you like, has been time, but it's not just time, it's giving it attention over that time and kind of allowing yourself to process it, allowing yourself to feel something. And as I said, in the past, I've been a lot less expressive and a lot shyer of talking, of admitting I've even got feelings, let alone that they're difficult. But privately, I've always kind of embraced sadness and grief. Obviously, I've lost other people, had other sad things happen, and I'm not afraid to feel something. And so I think that the sense of guilt and responsibility that I probably felt for this, rightly or more likely unfairly, kind of forced me to do a lot of reflecting, a lot of thinking in those times when I was really upset. I found the anniversary particularly difficult, the first anniversary. I'd gone to university, I'd left the town we grew up in. Obviously, I was enjoying it. I was having a good time. My life was moving on. I was doing more studying. And I was very conscious that he was doing none of that, and he was buried in the ground. And I am of that to this day. I've got children. I've had a pretty privileged and happy life in kind of historical and geographical terms compared to most people. I can't complain. But he's had none of that. His life just froze 18 years old. And so on the anniversary, I did feel this guilt and this responsibility and sadness. And on the day, I decided to just get the train back to the town I was from, about a 4-hour journey in each direction, and wrote him a card and placed it on his grave, stood there for a few minutes, and then got the train home. So that, I think, just kind of reflects how much of my time that 1 year on I was really thinking about it and dedicating to it. And it just built up and up over there. It was in March, probably from about going back to university in January or so. It just seemed to build up, and I can't guess a number of days per week on average that I was upset by thinking about it, but I think it was quite a lot. It was quite intense, and again, it was something that I wouldn't really share with people.
No.
I think giving that sort of emotional time space to yourself helps.
Right. Yeah. So you've learned how to do that, learned how to recognise when you need to be upset, and it's okay to be upset, and giving yourself space to do that, an allowance to do that. You've learned how to do that over the years by the sounds of it, with lots of different experiences, not just this.
Yeah.
It's astounding as well, isn't it, how it's the future-orientated grief when you lose somebody young, that you're watching other things happen and then they're not there to do it with you, that you're explaining, and as a friend going through university and things thinking he should be doing this too. How long did that last for? Very long? Did that calm down a little bit year on year?
Yeah, I think it calmed down, and the first anniversary was definitely the most intense kind of episode of those kind of feelings. But I think it continued in waves for quite a long time, and to some extent I probably still feel it now. Even talking now, I feel sad that that happened and he didn't have the chance to do the things and to meet the people and have the experiences that I have in the last 20 years or so. I think, sorry, I've spoken a little bit already about the sort of giving attention to your feelings, but I think also just gradually becoming a bit more expressive as I got older. I think that a year later, I had a granddad that was very close to die. He was only, I think, 62 then or something, so quite young, quite suddenly. And that really was upsetting. I think those two episodes somehow helped me be a little bit more open with people and kind of a little bit more able to acknowledge feelings. And my partner and wife now I've spoken to about Zaf, I'm kind of more comfortable mentioning him in passing now, due to family, to friends. I don't have conversations like this well, I've never had a conversation like this before, but I'm comfortable sort of mentioning his name and referring to it. And that isn't a great deal, but it's a big step from where I would have been when I was 17, 18, 19. And I do think that expression and acknowledgement to other people and with other people does help. I feel kind of more comfortable speaking to people that don't know me and that don't have any connection to him and to them, perhaps, than I would do to people who I knew then. And I think that perhaps the relationships I've made since then, sort of since going to university, because that was 6 months later or so, have probably been characterized by a slightly greater level of kind of emotional maturity than they might have been otherwise, and that it has probably had a positive impact on some of my relationships since then. I'm still do and have joked around and have fun, but I think I'm not scared to talk to people in a bit more depth than otherwise. And maybe it's something that would have happened anyway, and maybe it was accelerated, but I do attribute some of that to him and to this experience, which is a positive thing. I think I've become a little bit more open, a little bit more caring, a little bit more aware, maybe to try and avoid the feelings of guilt that I struggled with, but a little bit more available to people. And that's a positive thing. I think that, it was an awful experience. It's not one that I'd ever want to go through again or wish on anybody else. But that doesn't mean there can't be some positives that come from it. And if that means he leaves some kind of legacy, or it's something that kind of honours him and his life and his pain in some way, then to me that's a good thing. So I'm not ashamed or afraid to say that it had an awful effect in some ways, but in others it could have actually been beneficial to me.
Yeah, post-traumatic growth, it's the twist, because you could feel guilty for saying, well, I'm a better person because of it, but it's an honourable thing to say as well, because I'm sure our loved ones, I'm sure Zaf, I'm sure my brother would want to know that I'm being the best I can be and growing from this, as opposed to, then some of us I can't even entertain the idea of doing anything other than growing from it, and it's part of that baton of picking up for them that we do, I think. And I hear that you're just wanting to, I can do it for him, or make something. Is that through the guilt? Is it through the regrets? Or is it just because it's happened? We can't change what's happened. We can't do anything about what's happened now. And we wish we could go back and change before some of the things we did, but we can't. So it's moving on as much as we can with what we can do, with what we have from the experience.
And us doing that, us acknowledging that, doesn't add to Zaf's pain, doesn't add to your brother's pain, doesn't make their life any worse. So there can't be anything bad about growing in some way as a person, about doing something positive. I've not done something that I know that some of your guests have done, and kind of dedicated myself in a way that they may have done to helping people, or to fundraising, or to doing something more positive, not to the extent that a lot of people might do, especially perhaps when it's someone very, very close to you. But I have grown, I have learned from the experience, and that's only a good thing, because you can't undo the experience, so you may as well get something useful from it.
Yeah.
And the other thing which I think has helped on this journey, and helped again perhaps with the expressiveness and with acknowledging emotion and with processing what happened, is I've sometime volunteering with the Samaritans, and I left when the first daughter was born because I just didn't have the time to dedicate to it. But I'm going back to it now and redoing the training, which is what actually kind of encouraged me to look for a podcast on the subject, and how I found your work and the stories of your other guests.
Right.
And that's been really useful and helpful and healthy, because it's for anyone that's not aware, it's a secular service that's there to support people who are having a difficult time. It can be people who are suicidal, it could be people that are affected by suicide, or it could be people who have other stresses and strains. And it's non-directive. It's purely aimed at focusing on the other person's experience and letting them talk things through. It's non-directive. And the experience of talking to people and listening to people in that way, I think, has been really beneficial to me. There might be a little bit of me that sees it as, or saw it and now sees it again as something of a tribute to Zaf, and something to do in his memory, to offer him or me 20 years ago something that perhaps neither of us had. I'm sure he didn't kind of contact anyone, or I'd be very surprised if he had have done, and I certainly didn't. But the service is there. I think that's really, really important. perhaps most importantly, although their mission, their vision is to kind of reduce the number of people who die from suicide and to support people so that that isn't the outcome. They completely respect people's rights and people's responsibility to make their own decisions. And their vision is not for no one to die by suicide. So if you phone them up and you in a place where that is your only option, you don't want anything else, they'll support you. They will metaphorically over the phone hold your hand while you go through it if that's what you want. And that obviously means that people are not reluctant to phone for fear of being judged or being told not to do it. And it gives everybody a space to talk. But it also really, I think, gave me the message that it's not my responsibility and that his choice, his decision is sad and tragic, but it wasn't my fault. So I think their kind of belief in self-determination really helped with those feelings of guilt. And I didn't join it knowing that. I joined it thinking it'd be good to be able to support people in that situation, but be kind of learning a little bit about the approach and about the idea that it is that person's right, their choice, their option was something that I found useful. It might kind of sound strange when you've been bereaved by suicide, and I'm sure not everyone would be completely on board with what I've just said, but I found that helpful personally.
Yeah, I trained as a Samaritan before my brother died. So I already had been in that position of a listening volunteer where you hear other people suicidal and just struggling, and having that training of the whole side of things. So when my brother did pass, I remember really, I didn't link it to the Samaritans or anything, but I do remember thinking it helped me to process it in the same way that, yeah, it was his right. Again, that can be really difficult for us all to accept, but for me, that really helped me to process it the only way I could. And because I'd had that training beforehand, it helped me just to be able to talk about it as well, because suicide wasn't a word that was foreign to me because of my training with Samaritans, and being open to talk to other people as a Samaritan about suicide meant that it's probably part of the journey of why I'm here now talking about suicide, because it's been part of my language for quite a long time. But for many, and when suicide happens, it's not part of the language, like for you at 17. And that's why things like this need to happen, that it becomes part of our language, but in a healthy way. And that's what Samaritans are doing, aren't they? They're trying to say, we want to reduce suicide. Of course we do. But we also want to be there to listen if someone does feel suicidal. Because if you give people that space to talk if they're suicidal, you don't know what then will happen if they've got that space to share, and it's their right to be able to share it. So obviously doing that's great. I'm glad you're back onto it, because there's nights involved, and it's not easy, is it? You have to dedicate one night a month, and you're sitting on the phones all night. So thank you for doing it. It's great.
Oh, well, thank you likewise. And no, it's not easy, but I think it can be a very rewarding thing. And yeah, obviously I don't want to overstate the self-determination position, and Samaritans do not want people to take their own lives. They just respect people's agency. And I like the thought as well that he wanted to have somebody with him in those last moments. There was somebody that would have done it with him. It couldn't have been me, been his parents. It couldn't have been a counsellor or a psychologist. It couldn't have been a medical professional, physical medical professional. It couldn't have been his brother or his cousin. There's no one else that's going to do that. And I like the thought that there's a little bit of comfort for people if they want that right at the end. And I think that's really valuable. And why that's kind of, I want to spend some of my time doing voluntary work with, one of the reasons anyway. So yeah, I think that's been really helpful. And the fact that I do that, the fact that I am able to sort of feel that I'm a little bit more open and caring, I'm not saying I always support people. I'm not saying that I never fail, but I maybe try a little bit harder. That my relationships are healthier, I think, than they might have been if I hadn't been through this. I've been in touch with some of the people moving away, and teachers and friends that formally gradually lose touch, but I've been in touch with some of them since then and swapped a few messages. There's one teacher who said she was able to support a pupil, didn't breach any confidentiality or anything, but she said she was able to support people in a really difficult place that she probably wouldn't have done if she wouldn't have been able to, if she hadn't have been this experience. So I think that contact with other people, that this is meaningful for, and that ability to ascribe some kind of personal meaning to what happened and to kind of integrate it into your life story and your idea of who you are is, a really healthy thing to do as well. And it might be there's some negative consequences, but there may also be some positive ones, and finding some meaning is really important.
Yeah, God.
As well.
I believe the negative force the positive sometimes. My research and things is that it's almost because of the negative is so overwhelming. And personally, it's forced me to do something positive, almost forced me. It's like a drive, like a innate, I can't not do it, because the alternative of the pain and the difficulty, I would rather switch that into the positive. It's not about rather, actually, it's just about a drive. I can't not. And I think my research is showing that some of us come to it from that pain, hence still need supporting while we're running support groups, being a Samaritan, doing events and fundraising. We need supporting too, because usually it comes from a place of pain that we're supporting other people. And that's what my research findings are concluding for professionals to understand. We need multi-level support going through the Suicide Grief Network. And that's what I'm passionate about sharing. I'm passionate about putting into research in the academic world and the professional world. And it goes right back to your story of going into a school at that point, when that happens in a school, going in and going into their safe spaces and having those places where you could feel exactly, we can't force anyone to speak. Nobody could force you to speak. I don't think at 17, it sounded like you were pretty zipped up, but just having the space, just having that space, and there's proactive help. I'm all for, get very passionate about that.
Yeah, I was zipped up, but I was zipped up to a teacher, to grandparents, to my parents. If I'd had someone who I didn't know, because even now I think I find it easier to talk about someone who I'm removed from than someone who I'm close to, there might have been an opportunity. I'll never know because it wasn't on the table.
No.
But no, I agree, it's really important and really valuable. And if you can't reach some people, at least you can try. And, I know the Samaritans are only in the process of rejoining in, but they do a school service for people who go in where people have been bereaved in school. And that's something that maybe in the future I'll, time permitting, look to get involved with, as well as many other services, prisons and festivals and supermarkets. There's loads of places where they try to reach people, but the schools one is obviously particularly personal to me, and I wasn't aware that they did that.
Well, it's great. I love to hear, there's this personal growth with you and with other people at NewsApp, that you've made what you can, you're helping other people. And what more can you do? What more can you do with that? And it sounds like you have been through the regrets and the guilt, and it's really hard to get out of that loop of the guilt and regret. But if you can find a way of doing it, then we have to carry on living. We are still here. We have to try and make our way through, because sadly they aren't. And it's a real twist and a turn all the time between sadness and trying to be positive. But it sounds like you've found your way with that. And there's been that personal growth that you, even just a tiny bit, can feel, whilst knowing that I can almost hear, there's this, but I was only a friend. But still, like I keep saying, it's all about the relationship you had. And if you had a close relationship and that happens to somebody you've got a relationship with, the nuances of that relationship will play out in the grief. They're going to be there. If you had a relationship with them, you're going to have some type of grief.
And there's one thing I've, like maybe adding to that, I've kind of, in thinking about obviously speaking with you, I've kind of reflected that if he was still alive, it's very possible he might have lost touch in the last 20 years. I've lost touch with a lot of people. And so in a way, he's having potentially more of an impact on my life now than he might have done if he was alive. And that's obviously not the case if it's your brother, son, father, mother, etc., partner, wife, husband, whatever. And it's kind of a strange realization to come to, but it's true. I could well have lost touch with him when I went to university. Again, I'm sure we would have been friends on Facebook and stuff since, but I may have lost touch with him. And it's slightly strange to feel that if this hadn't have happened, then we still might not know each other. And that is an honest reflection. And I think it probably does differentiate the experience of a friend from some of those more immediate relationships. And I'm sure I can't even imagine what it's like for the people like yourself with those even close relationships. But your pain and the pain of everyone that's in that position doesn't make it any easier for people where it's, in quotes, only a friend or only a colleague or only a teacher or only a student. It's still awful and it's still hard.
Exactly.
And it's not a competition. I think that providing some support to the like you said, the wider kind of set of people is a really valid and helpful thing to do if and when possible.
Yeah, gosh. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. You've been really honest about so much of what it was like for you, even amongst that whole story of he was only my friend, and been as honest you can with how you've coped with it and with the feelings you had at the time. And it's been really great to hear that, especially when it was 20 years ago. We've moved on so much, but still there's people like you out there now living with the effects of a suicide 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 10 years ago. And it just shows all the nuances and all the differences just between the relationships and the time it happened and how long ago it happened. And it's always just such a unique story. So thank you for sharing yours. It's been really interesting.
Well, thank you for having me. And I would just say that I'm sure we have moved on, but that progression won't reach everyone. There'll be lots of people, I'm sure, who would still be in similar situations to I was if it happened today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. But the Samaritans are there.
That's right. That's right.
The Samaritans' phone number in the links. So if anybody does want to speak to Samaritan, have that complete and utter open conversation with a Samaritan that's trained there just to listen, just to hear you, you'll have the number. So it's such a vital service. It's brilliant. Love Samaritans. 24/7 as well. Open all day, all night. You can ring any time.
Yeah.
And you might get Nick. If you recognise his voice one day, if you ever ring, you might get Nick.
You may do. And they do emails and instant messaging services as well, if that's a preference for people. So
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being here, Nick. It's been really interesting speaking to you. Anything you want to share before we finish?
And I appreciate you speaking for a while, so I won't say too much more, but I think if I was to say one sentence to my 17-year-old self, it would just be simple. It would be, it's not your fault. And, I know in your other guests, people talk about trying to support people. I didn't really provide enough of that support. We had the bet situation going on. His kind of drawings and some of the things he wrote could well be interpreted as warning signals now, or by someone who knew what they were looking at. Yeah. There were things I could have done if I was me now, back then, and if I knew what I was doing, I could have done. We didn't give him what he could have benefited from, I'm sure. But I was his friend. I was someone that he enjoyed company with, that he trusted, that we were happy in each other's company and relaxed and had a good relationship. So I might not have done every single thing I could have done for him, but I was a little positive in his life. I'm not saying I was the main one, and I'm not saying that it was that meaningful to him, but in the grand scheme of things, I made his life a tiny bit better.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're listening to this kind of podcast and you're grieving someone who you've lost in this way, and you treated them with an ounce of compassion and understanding and care, I would be quite confident betting that you've been positive in the person that you've lost life, and focus on that. I really did carry the guilt heavily, and I don't think people should do that in the vast majority of situations.
Yeah, it's not your fault. Yeah, brilliant thing to leave with people. Yeah, try and think of the positive aspects of the relationship you had, because it's easy to see the negatives of the relationship you have with your loved ones, but think of the positives and repeat consistently, it's not my fault. Thank you, Nick. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us here today. I hope it's served you and given you something for your journey with suicide. Come back and subscribe, like, do whatever you need to do on your platform to help us to raise awareness of suicide, because the more we keep saying the word, the more we can gain support for us left behind, and the more we can raise awareness of the word and how society sees it and reduce this stigma that's so attached to it. Please get in touch. You can find me on my website, suicidegriefsupport.com. I really want to hear from you. But for now, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And remember, we are stronger together.